Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening up a file that sits right at the intersection of real estate dreams and, honestly, sometimes contract nightmares.
It really does.
It's a topic that sounds incredibly simple on the surface, but the deeper you look, the more complex and fascinating it becomes.
It is a fascinating area. It's really where human psychology, our hopes and fears about home ownership meets hard property law.
We are talking about the lease option. You might know it as rent-to-own. It's this sort of magical bridge concept where you're renting a house, but you have this golden ticket to buy it later.
Right.
It sounds like the perfect solution, right? You
Yeah.
can't buy yet.
Yeah.
Maybe the bank said no, maybe you're new in town, so you rent, but you lock it in. It feels like having your cake and eating it too.
It sounds perfect on paper. And I mean, for some people, it is exactly the tool they need. It's like a surgical instrument that can cut right through some very specific financial barriers. But for others, it can be a trap. And not just a minor inconvenience kind of trap. We are talking about a trap where you can lose years of savings and end up with absolutely nothing to show for it.
Exactly. And that's our mission today. We are going to unpack the mechanics of this. We aren't just skimming the surface.
Yeah.
We are looking at the contract law, the investor strategies, and the specific risks that come along with it. We are drawing from a really detailed breakdown of real estate contracts to understand what makes a lease option valid and, frankly, what makes it so dangerous. We have a lot of source material to get through, from legal breakdowns to, investor playbooks on how to leverage these deals for profit.
And we have to start with the definitions because words really, really matter here. In this specific niche of real estate, if you use the wrong word, you might be describing a completely different legal reality with totally different obligations.
They do. Okay, so let's start with the initial definition. Broadly speaking, what are we looking at?
A lease option is, at its core, an agreement between a property owner and a tenant. But it's actually two agreements sort of bundled into one.
Okay.
First, you have the lease. That's the standard rental agreement that gives you the right to live in the property. Simple enough.
Right, I pay rent, I get to live there.
Exactly. Second, you have the option. And this is a separate legal concept that says after a certain period, the renter can buy the property at a specific price.
That word "can" is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, isn't it?
It is doing all the heavy lifting. It's the whole ball game.
Right. And this leads us to the first major distinction we have to make before we go any further. The difference between a lease option and a lease purchase.
Yes.
I used to think these were synonyms. I think most people use rent-to-own as this big catch-all term for both.
Most people do. They use them interchangeably, but legally, they are worlds apart. And if you sign the wrong one thinking it's the other, you could be in for a world of hurt.
So what's the difference?
A lease purchase is exactly what it sounds like. It binds both parties. You are leasing the property, yes, but you have also signed a purchase contract that says you must buy it at the end of the term. You are obligated.
So let's play that out. If I sign a lease purchase and 2 years later I lose my job, or maybe the market crashes and the house is suddenly worth half of what I agreed to pay, I'm still on the hook to buy that house.
Correct. You are legally bound. The seller is bound to sell to you, and you are bound to buy from them. It is a bilateral agreement. It's a two-way street.
And if I walk away?
If you walk away, the seller can sue you for breach of contract. They can technically sue for something called specific performance, which means a court could literally force you to buy the house. More likely, though, they'll sue you for damages. You don't have an exit ramp.
Okay, that sounds incredibly stressful. It removes all the flexibility that makes this idea so attractive in the first place.
It does. It's a much more rigid instrument.
So how is a lease option different?
A lease option is unilateral. It's a one-way street, but in a good way for the buyer. The seller is bound. They must sell it to you at the agreed price if you decide you want it. They can't just wake up tomorrow and decide to sell it to their cousin for a better price.
They're locked in.
They're locked in. But you, the tenant buyer, you have the option. You have the choice. You can exercise your option to buy it, or you can just walk away.
So I hold all the cards, at least on the buy or not buy decision.
In terms of that final decision-making, yes, you control the destiny of that deed. But, and this is a big but, to get those cards, you have to pay for them. And that is where we get into the real mechanics of the deal.
Okay, let's get into that. We've identified 7 critical elements that make up these deals. And the first one is exactly what you just hinted at. It's called valuable consideration. Sounds very official.
Right. And this is just Contract Law 101. For an option to be valid, something of value, usually money, has to change hands. You can't just shake on it and say, hey, I might buy this from you in a couple of years.
That's just a conversation.
It's just a conversation. It's not a legally enforceable contract. You have to actually buy the right to buy the house later. And this payment is the option fee.
And this isn't a security deposit, right? I feel like that's a really common misconception. People think, oh, I'll get that back.
It is the most common misconception, and it's a dangerous one. A security deposit is refundable. It is your money held in trust by the landlord to cover potential damages. If you don't trash the place, you get it back when you move out.
Simple enough.
The option fee is generally non-refundable. Need to hear that again. Non-refundable. You are purchasing a thing of value, the exclusive right to buy that property at a set price for a set time. Once you pay that fee, the seller cannot sell that house to anyone else during the option term. You have bought that exclusivity.
So if I change my mind and decide not to buy the house,
The seller keeps the money, no questions asked.
because they took their house off the market for me. They missed out on other potential buyers during that time. They had an opportunity cost.
Exactly. They upheld their end of the bargain by holding the property for you. You paid for that service.
So how much money are we talking about here? If I want to do this, what's the price of admission?
Well, it varies a lot. It's a negotiation. If you are the seller, you want as much as possible to ensure the buyer is serious. You want them to have significant skin in the game.
So they won't walk away easily.
Precisely. So typically you see sellers asking for 3% to 5% of the purchase price.
Okay, so on a $400,000 house, that's $12,000 to $20,000 up front. That's real money.
It is. It's not pocket change. It's a serious commitment. Now, on the other side, if you are the buyer, or maybe a savvy investor acting as the buyer, you want to pay as little as possible.
Of course.
And technically, legal consideration can be a token amount. It could be $100. It could even be $10.
Seriously. I could lock up a $500,000 property for under bucks.
Legally, yes. Courts have upheld options with what they call nominal consideration. Practically speaking, good luck getting a seller to agree to that unless they're very, very desperate or you are an incredible negotiator.
Yeah.
But the principle is that something of value must be paid to make the contract binding.
Okay, so we've paid our fee. We have our option. Now, element number 2, the purchase price. How do we decide what I'm going to pay for this house 2 or 3 years from now?
There are really two schools of thought on this. The less common way is that you agree that the price will be determined by an appraisal at the time of purchase. So in 2 years, whatever a licensed appraiser says it's worth, that's what I pay.
Which seems fair, I guess, but it's not very exciting. It basically just defers the negotiation and removes any upside for me as the buyer.
Exactly. It removes the speculative element. It's safe, but it's not why most people do this. The more common method, and the one that really attracts people to lease options, is agreeing on the purchase price at the inception, right at the very beginning.
This is the gamble.
This is a total gamble on the future of the real estate market. Let's say the house is worth $300,000 today. The seller might say, okay, I'll give you an option to buy it in 3 years, but the price is going to be $320,000.
Okay, so they're hedging. They're betting on at least a little bit of appreciation.
They're trying to capture future appreciation. They assume the house will be worth more later, so they want to lock that in.
But if I'm the buyer, I'm betting the market is going to go crazy. I'm hoping that in 3 years, that house isn't worth $320,000. It's worth $350,000 or even more.
Right. And if you're correct, and it is worth $350,000, you get to execute your option to buy it for $320,000. The moment you close, you instantly have $30,000 in equity. You've beaten the market.
That's the dream scenario. But let's look at the flip side. What if the market tanks? What if there's a recession and the house is only worth $280,000 in 3 years?
Then you walk away.
Just like that.
Just like that. You lose your option fee. Your $10,000 or whatever it was is gone. But you aren't stuck buying a house for $40,000 more than it's worth. That's the safety valve of the option versus the purchase. You aren't underwater on a mortgage because you never had to take out the mortgage in the first place.
I see. It's like buying a stock option, really. You're betting on the future value, and your risk is capped at the premium you paid.
That's a perfect analogy. Your risk is limited to the option fee.
Okay, element number 3. The timeline, the duration. How long do these things last?
In residential real estate, the typical term is 1 to 3 years. But there is a huge trap here for the tenant buyer, and the source material is very, very clear on this.
What's the trap?
A short-term lease option, say 2 years or less, is often unwise for the buyer.
Really, 2 years feels like a long time to me.
It feels like it, but life and financial recovery move fast. Usually the person entering a lease option is doing it because they have some kind of hurdle to overcome.
Right. Yeah, bad credit, no down payment.
Yep.
Something is stopping them from buying today.
Exactly. And fixing those problems takes time. If you have bad credit, you need to clear up disputes on your credit report. Each dispute can take 30 to 45 days. You need to build a new, positive history of on-time payments, and most lenders want to see at least 12, sometimes 24 months of that.
So if the term is only a year, the clock runs out before they can even get their financial house in order.
Precisely. The option expires, they lose that non-refundable fee, and they are right back at square one, maybe even worse off because they're out that cash. So if you're the buyer, you want as long a term as you can possibly negotiate. You want runway.
That makes sense. Okay, you mentioned rent credits earlier. That's element number 4, and I think this is the part that really sells people on the whole idea. It makes it feel like your rent money isn't just dead money disappearing into a landlord's pocket.
That is the psychological hook. It's a powerful one. The idea is that a portion of your monthly rent goes toward your down payment or the purchase price. But let's look at the math, because it's rarely as simple as it sounds. You aren't usually paying just market rent.
You're paying a premium on top of it.
Right. Let's use the example from the source. Let's say fair market rent for a particular house is $1,000 a month. In a lease option scenario, the seller might charge $1,100 or $1,200.
Okay, so it's more expensive than just renting down the street.
Correct. And that extra amount is the rent credit. So in the source example, the market rent is $1,000. The seller charges $1,100. That extra $100 is then credited back to the buyer at closing.
So wait, in that example, I'm paying $100 over market to get a $100 credit. That's a wash.
In that simple example, yes. But often it's structured more favorably. The seller might charge $1,100 but offer a $200 credit.
Okay. So I'm paying a $100 premium to get a $200 benefit. That's a better deal.
It is. It functions like that forced savings plan we mentioned. Over 2 years, that $200 a month adds up to $4,800 off the purchase price or towards your closing costs. It makes the tenant feel invested. They aren't just renters anymore. They start to see themselves as future owners.
But it's important to remember, the base rent, that $1,000, usually covers the landlord's mortgage, taxes, and insurance. The credit is really coming from the premium you pay.
That's almost always the case. It's not free money.
Which leads us to element 5, occupancy and rights. I assume the tenant actually lives there.
In a typical rent-to-own scenario with a family, yes, they live there. But the contract needs to be very specific about their rights. Can they sublease a room? Probably not. Can they sell the option itself to someone else?
Ooh, now that's interesting.
It is, and that becomes a huge, huge deal when we start talking about investors later on. But for a standard family, yes, they are moving in and making it their home.
And once they move in, things get weird compared to a normal rental.
Element 6.
Maintenance.
This is the big shift in mindset and responsibility. In a normal rental, if the toilet breaks or the roof starts leaking, who do you call?
The landlord. It's their house, their problem.
Right. But in a lease option, the psychology is different. You are practicing being the owner. So the contract often shifts the burden of maintenance, or at least a portion of it, to the tenant buyer.
So I'm paying rent every month, but I'm also the one fixing the garbage disposal when it jams.
Often, yes. The contract might say the seller is responsible for major structural things, like the foundation or the roof, but the tenant handles everything else. Or maybe there is a deductible, like the tenant pays for the first $100 of any repair, and the landlord covers the rest.
But either way, it's more responsibility on the tenant.
Much more. And from the seller's perspective, this is a fantastic deal. No more 3 a.m. calls about a leaky faucet. Their life just got a lot easier.
But for the tenant, it's a real risk. You could pour thousands of dollars into fixing up a house that you end up not even buying. Imagine spending $5,000 on new floors or a water heater, and then your financing falls through at the last minute.
You just donated those floors and that water heater to the landlord. You don't get that money back. It's a tough pill to swallow.
It really is. Okay, so we had the mechanics down. The fee, the price, the timeline, the credits, occupancy, and maintenance. Now, I want to pivot to the people who use these mechanics like a chessboard. The investors.
Yes.
Because this isn't just for families trying to buy a home. This is a huge, well-established strategy for real estate investors.
Absolutely. The investor strategies are fascinating because they take these simple mechanics and layer them to create incredible leverage. They essentially detach the utility of the house living in it from the financial control of the house.
The source describes something called the sandwich strategy.
Hmm.
Now, I'm getting hungry, but I'm assuming this isn't about lunch.
No, it's about being the middleman. You are the meat in the sandwich positioned between two other parties.
Okay, so break it down. How does this sandwich work?
Okay, imagine an investor finds a distressed seller. Maybe the house is a little run down and hard to sell, or maybe the seller just needs out. They got a job in another state, they can't cover 2 mortgages, they're desperate.
A motivated seller.
A very motivated seller. The investor goes to the seller and enters into a lease option with them. So, the investor is now technically the tenant buyer.
But the investor has no intention of ever living in that house.
None at all. And the contract they sign explicitly gives the investor the right to sublease the property and assign the option. So what do they do next?
They turn around and find someone who does want to live there.
Exactly. They find a tenant buyer, a family who wants to live in the house but can't get a mortgage just yet.
So the investor is the tenant to the original owner, and they become the landlord to the new resident.
Precisely. They are sandwiched right in the middle, and they make money on the spread in multiple ways.
Okay, let's walk through the math example from the source, because seeing the numbers really clarifies this. It can get a little confusing.
Sure. So let's say the investor enters an agreement with the original seller for a purchase price of $100,000. That's the price the investor can buy it for. Let's say they agree to pay the seller $800 a month in rent.
Okay, so a $100,000 price is locked in, and they're paying out $800 a month.
Correct. The investor then maybe does some light cosmetic work. Let's say they spend $20,000 fixing it up. New paint, new carpets, clean up the landscaping. Now, because of that work, the fair market value of the house jumps to $135,000.
So they've created $15,000 in equity, effectively. The value is $135K, their purchase price is $100K, and they put in $20K of work.
Right. But instead of buying it themselves and going through the hassle of getting a loan, they sell the right to purchase to a final buyer. They market the home as a rent-to-own for $135,000.
And they find that family who can't get a loan yet.
Yep, they find a family who puts down, say, a $5,000 non-refundable option fee and agrees to pay $1,200 a month in rent.
Wait, okay, hold on. Walk me through the cash flow there, because there are a few things happening at once.
Okay, so first, the investor collects that $5,000 option fee from the family. That's immediate cash in their pocket. That might cover their own option fee to the original seller and then some.
Got it. Upfront profit.
Then, every single month, they have cash flow. They collect $1,200 from the family. They turn around and pay the original seller their $800, and they keep the $400 difference.
That's the monthly spread, the sandwich filling.
Yeah, it's the sandwich filling. That's pure monthly profit. And then there's the big payday at the end.
When the family finally gets their mortgage.
Right. Let's say in 2 years, the family gets their mortgage approved. They buy the house for the agreed-upon $135,000. The closing happens. The original seller gets their $100,000 that was promised to them.
And the investor?
The investor gets the remaining $35,000. From that, you'd subtract their $20,000 in rehab costs. So their back-end profit is $15,000, plus the $5,000 option fee they collected up front, plus the $400 a month they made for 2 years, which is another $9,600.
So the original seller gets their price, the final buyer gets the house they wanted, and the investor walks away with a pretty hefty profit for being the middleman.
Exactly. The investor controlled a valuable asset and profited from the appreciation and the value add of the rehab, all without ever actually taking title to the home. It's a way to control assets with very little of your own money and without the liability of actually owning them.
That sounds brilliant, but it also sounds, I don't know, really risky. What if something goes wrong in the middle of all that?
There are significant risks, huge risks. The biggest one for the investor in this scenario is the title to the property.
What do you mean?
You are putting $20,000 of your own rehab money into a house you do not own. What if the original seller, the one you have the deal with, has a secret tax line you didn't know about? What if they go bankrupt? What if they're going through a messy divorce and the spouse suddenly refuses to sign the deed? What if they just can't transfer clear title when it's time to buy?
Then your deal with the final family is dead.
Yeah.
And you lose your $20,000.
You lose the entire improvement budget, and you have a very, very angry final buyer who paid you an option fee for a house you can't deliver. You could be facing serious legal action for fraud or breach of contract.
The source mentions an alternative for this specific risk, something called subject to. How is that different?
Yes. If an investor is going to do a major rehab, I'm talking anything more than just paint and carpet. A lease option is usually way too risky for the reasons we just discussed. They might prefer a subject to transaction.
Okay.
This is where the investor actually takes the title, The deed transfers into their name immediately, but the existing mortgage stays in the original seller's name.
So they actually own the house. So their renovation money is safe because they own the asset they're improving.
Correct. They hold the deed. It's much safer for the rehab money. Now, it carries a whole different set of risks, like the bank's due on sale clause, but that's a topic for another deep dive. For lease options, the rule of thumb for an investor is don't rehab a house you don't own unless the numbers are small enough that you can afford to lose them completely.
Okay, that's a good rule.
Yeah.
There's another investor strategy mentioned, which is the buyer investor. This is less about being a middleman and more about using sweat equity.
This is a fantastic strategy for someone who is handy, but maybe a little short on cash for down payment. Let's say you want to buy a house, but you don't have that 20% down payment sitting in the bank.
Right, common problem.
You find a seller with a house that's structurally sound, but ugly. It needs work. You agree to a lease option with that seller. You move in.
And instead of saving for a down payment, I use my cash to buy materials and fix the place up myself.
Exactly. You use your savings for lumber, paint, new light fixtures. You do the work yourself on weekends. You're increasing the value of the house with your own labor.
You're building sweat equity.
That's the term. When your option term is up, the house is now worth significantly more. When you go to the bank to get the loan-to-value ratio, the LTV, looks much better because the house appraises for a higher value. You have essentially substituted your cash down payment for your sweat.
I love that. It's like bootstrapping your way into home ownership. It feels very, I don't know, American dreamish.
It's a great way to get started if you have more time and skill than cash.
Okay, we have looked at the mechanics and the investors. Now I want to look at the motivation matrix. Why do people do this? Why not just keep renting or wait until you can buy traditionally? Let's start with the buyer. We mentioned bad credit, but the source lists a whole bunch of other reasons.
It's not just about bad credit. Sometimes it's about unprovable income. Business owners are a classic example.
How so?
You might have just started a new business. It's doing great. You have plenty of cash flow. Business is booming. But banks, they're very conservative. They typically require a 2-year tax history showing stable income before they'll give you a mortgage.
Right. So the bank sees you as a high risk, even if you're making a ton of money, just because the income isn't seasoned.
Exactly. So a lease option buys you that 2-year window. You can secure the house you want for your family now. You lock in the price, and you just wait for your tax returns to catch up to your business reality.
That's a great use case.
Oh,
What about relocation?
that's a huge one. Imagine you're moving your family to a new city for a job. You don't know the neighborhoods. You don't know if the schools are actually as good as their websites claim, or if they just look good on Zillow.
You don't know where the good grocery store is?
You don't know anything. Do you really want to commit to a 30-year mortgage and plant roots on day one?
Probably not. You want to test drive the city first.
A lease option lets you do that. You lock in a house you like in a neighborhood that seems promising. If you find out 6 months later that the commute is an absolute nightmare or the neighbors, run a drum circle at 2 a.m. every Tuesday,
You can bail.
you can walk away. You'll pay a price for that flexibility. You lose the option fee. But that's often way cheaper than buying a house, paying thousands in closing costs, realizing you hate it, and then paying a 6% commission to a realtor to sell it again a year later.
That makes a lot of sense. It's risk mitigation for the buyer's lifestyle, not just their finances. There was also a specific note in the source about VA loans.
Yes, this is a very clever niche strategy. VA loans are fantastic, often zero down payment, but they have very strict appraisal standards about the physical condition of the property.
What kind of things?
Peeling paint, a bad roof, a missing handrail on a staircase, broken windows, any of these can be a deal killer for a VA appraisal. The house has to meet certain minimum property requirements.
So a classic fixer-upper isn't going to qualify for a VA loan.
Right. So a savvy veteran might use a lease option to move into the house, use their own money and time to fix those specific checklist-style issues during the lease term, and then, once the house is up to code and will pass the inspection.
They trigger the VA loan to buy it.
Exactly. It bridges that gap between the current condition of the house and the strict requirements of the bank.
That is really smart. Okay, let's flip the table. Why does the seller do this? If I have a house, why don't I just put a sign in the yard, sell it, and take the cash?
Usually it's because they can't. Or at least they can't easily. Maybe the market is really cold and there are no buyers. Maybe the house has some issues that make it hard to sell traditionally. A lease option opens up a much, much larger pool of potential buyers.
Because you're not just marketing to people who can get a bank loan today.
You're marketing to basically anyone who can afford the monthly payment, even if their credit is shot. You expand your market tenfold, so it solves the unsellable house problem.
But there's more to it than just desperation.
Oh, absolutely. There's a maximization component. There's a common rule in this business. Price or terms, pick one.
I like that. Explain what that means.
If a buyer comes to you with all cash and wants to close in 2 weeks, they have all the leverage. They're going to demand a discount. They get a low price because they offer perfect terms.
Cash is king.
But if a buyer needs terms, if they need time, flexibility, or seller financing like a lease option, then the seller has the leverage. The seller can demand a premium price.
So if I'm giving you 3 years to get your act together and buy my house, I'm going to charge you full retail plus maybe a little more for the trouble.
Exactly, you get your price. On top of that, you're keeping that non-refundable option fee. On top of that, you're likely getting above market rent every single month. And if the tenant ultimately doesn't buy, you keep all that money and just start the process over with someone new. It can be very, very profitable.
And there's a point in here about eviction versus foreclosure. This seems like a critical legal safety net for the seller.
It is absolutely crucial. If you sell a house to someone using traditional seller financing, where you act as the bank and hold the mortgage, and that buyer stops paying you,
You have to foreclose on them.
you have to foreclose. Foreclosure is a long, complicated, and very expensive legal process. Depending on the state, it can take months or even years to get your property back.
But in a lease option,
They are not an owner. They are technically a tenant. If they stop paying rent, you don't foreclose, you evict them.
an eviction is generally much faster and cheaper.
Much faster, much cheaper. It's governed by landlord-tenant law, not mortgage law. You can often get your property back in 30 to 60 days. It's a massive difference in risk management for the seller.
It is. But speaking of risk, we really need to get to the dark side of this. We've painted a picture of a flexible, useful tool, but there are some serious red flags and, as the source calls them, bank realities that can blow these deals up for the buyer.
This is the most important part of the conversation, I think. The biggest hurdle is what we call the financing hurdle, and it's specifically about those rent credits we talked about earlier.
This is the excess credit rule, right?
Yes, and this is where so many of these deals go to die, right at the finish line. So the buyer and seller, they have this nice agreement. I'm paying you $1,500 a month in rent, and we agree that $500 of that is going toward my down payment.
Okay, sounds good. It's in the contract.
It's in the contract. They shake hands. They sign it. It's all good. For 2 years, the buyer makes every payment on time.
And now they're ready to buy.
They're ready. They walk into the bank with their contract and their payment history and say, look, I saved up $12,000 in down payment credits. And the loan officer looks at it and says, hold on a second. What is the fair market rent for this house?
And if the bank's appraiser comes back and says the fair market rent is, say, $1,500,
Then the bank looks at the buyer and says, you didn't save anything, you just paid rent. The bank, the underwriter specifically, will typically only allow the amount paid above fair market rent to count as a down payment.
whoa. So if I was paying exactly market rent and the seller just gifted me a credit on paper, the bank just ignores it.
Often, yes. They view it as a seller concession or a gift, not as true cash equity from the buyer. And all of a sudden, that buyer who thought they had $12,000 for their down payment and closing costs has zero. They're short, the deal falls apart, the option expires, and the seller keeps everything.
That is absolutely devastating. That's 2 years of planning down the drain. So if you are a buyer, you need to make sure your total payments are documentably above the market rent if you want any of it to count.
Absolutely. It has to be crystal clear that you are paying a premium specifically for the equity. It's even better if you write 2 separate checks each month, one for rent and a second one for option payment. Documentation is everything.
Then there are the outright predatory practices. The source mentions a strategy called the churn.
This is the really ugly side of the business. Some unscrupulous investors or landlords will specifically scan for tenants who have absolutely no realistic chance of ever qualifying for a loan.
So they know from day one that the tenant has terrible credit, no savings, unstable income.
Right. They know this person will fail. But they sell them the dream of homeownership. They take a big non-refundable option fee, maybe $5,000 or $10,000. Then they set a very short term, maybe 6 months or a year, knowing full well the tenant can't possibly fix their credit and save for closing costs in that time.
The term runs out, the tenant can't buy.
And The landlord keeps the fee. They evict the tenant for not exercising their option or just let it expire, and then they put a new sign in the yard and find the next victim to pay another $5,000 fee. They just churn through people, harvesting option fees without ever having any intention of actually selling the house.
That is incredibly cynical. It's preying on people's desperation.
Oops, it is. And that's why that unilateral nature of the contract is so important to understand from both sides. A good seller is hoping you succeed. A predatory seller is betting you won't. It's an adversarial position in some ways.
And just to be clear, if the buyer defaults, if they stop paying rent halfway through the term, what happens then?
The whole thing collapses. The relationship reverts instantly to a simple landlord-tenant relationship. The option part of the contract is voided.
So you lose everything.
You lose the option fee, you lose all the rent credits you've accumulated, you are just a tenant who is behind on rent and is now facing eviction.
It's a very high-stakes game.
It is. You have to go in with your eyes wide open.
So let's synthesize this. We've covered a lot of ground. The mechanics of the fee and the price, the sandwich strategy for investors, the motivations for both buyers and sellers, and the very serious risks. What is the big overarching takeaway here?
I think the takeaway is that a lease option is a powerful and flexible tool, but it's not a standard rental. It is a sophisticated financial instrument that happens to be wrapped inside a lease agreement. You can't treat it casually.
For the buyer, it's a potential pathway to ownership when the front door seems locked. But it comes with a non-refundable cover charge, that option fee, and a very strict deadline.
And for the seller, it's a way to move difficult property and maximize your financial return, but it requires managing a tenant who, in their mind, is already an owner, which can create its own set of challenges.
I want to leave the listeners with a final thought, something to chew on. We talked about how the tenant buyer often takes on the burdens of maintenance. They're the one fixing the roof, painting the walls, replacing the dishwasher.
Right.
It makes me think about the very nature of ownership. In a lease option, you are technically just a tenant, but you are bearing the burdens and the costs of an owner, but you don't yet have the security of holding the title. You are paying, in a very real way, for the potential of future equity.
That's a really profound way to put it. You're not just renting a house, you're renting hope.
Exactly. And the question you have to ask yourself is the price of that potential, the option fee, the higher rent, the unexpected repair costs, is it worth the risk that that hope never becomes a reality?
That is the multi-$1,000 question every single tenant buyer has to answer for themselves before they sign that check.
And a question for you to consider before you ever sign on the dotted line. Read the fine print, everyone. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
My pleasure. See you next time.